still suggest that we should start. Thank you, Taylor, for recording this, and I would like to introduce our presenter speaker today, and Ciprian, who we met 2019, I think, in Osijek for the first time, and I think have been since again and again meeting more in cyberspace and somewhere in Zoom. What is fascinating, I think, that you have more or less completed. And in my previous life at a different institution, we had so-called mock vivas. That means where before you submit, or just after your submission of your dissertation, we would have a small examining group and would mock you, prepare in a positive way for the actual viva, the actual defense and presentation. Now we have even a little chance maybe to speak into this in case something needs to happen. So I think it is great that you agreed to present, and we are interested in listening and interacting with you as much as we can. And the first half of the time would go for you to do the presentations. If you want to have more feedback, you should limit it to 30 minutes. And then we would like to join in into a conversation. I want also to welcome all you who have joined us on Zoom. Some will be joined in YouTube. So stay, and I hope it will be also a good interaction and a joy in some ways, a celebration. Because I remember when Ciprian came and started this, now we are really at the finish line. And so this is exciting, great, and we look forward to hear what you have worked out, what you have now to present to us.
Thank you very much, Peter, and heartfelt thanks to CIEMS and the ODC, and to Taylor Daniel, and to all those who are part of this wonderful, excellent group of researchers. I count myself blessed to be able to be part of such a distinguished group. And right from the start, I would like to thank the Lord for allowing me this privilege to have people like you, like other colleagues who I've met through ODC, as friends, as contributors, as people who speak into my work and into my life. So to God be all the glory. Soli Deo Gloria. And I hope that what I will present in the next 30 minutes will be improved by the feedback you are going to give. Let me start by sharing my presentation here on screen. I prepared some keynote slides, but Zoom has transformed them into PDFs, but no problem. we can manage that. So the topic I will present today, and this is practically the title of my PhD thesis, is Communio Sanctorum toward a Pentecostal theology of public life. Before I say anything about the thesis and the research, which is still in process or in working, it will be submitted very soon, hopefully. I would like to say a few things about me, not necessarily for those present online at this moment, but maybe because most of us, we know each other, but for those who will watch later. So my name is Ciprian Luca. friends call me Ciprian or Chip or Cipri. And I'm happily married, have been for 19 years this year, to Liliana, or Lily, whom you can see in this picture. Oops, something went wrong.
We could see the pictures.
Yeah, okay. Let's see. And together we have 3 children, Daniel, Tabitha, and Jessica. Daniel just turned 18. He's the big guy here in these side pictures. Again, something happened. Tabitha is the middle one. You can see her in the picture on the right corner up. She's the one holding that diploma, the one wearing eyeglasses. That's Tabitha. And the little one is Jessica, Andrea Jessica. So we are very thankful to God for the family He has given us. I cannot see the pictures anymore. Can you?
We could see them.
No, sorry, but I can't. Yeah, here we go. And now some things about my PhD studies and my supervisor. I'm very blessed and proud to be supervised by Professor Marcel Măcelaru from Aurel Vlach University in Arad. This is the formal graduation of the PhD program, although we haven't had our visa, our vivas yet. But we had this sort of formal graduation in the summer in July, and I have been very, very privileged to be able to work with Professor Măcelaru as a supervisor. Then a few words about the ministry God has called me to. I'm a pastor at Emmanuel Christian Center in Bucharest. You can see a snippet of church service on the big photo. And I'm also an educator and public school principal at Emmanuel Pentecostal Theological High School in Bucharest, which is a Pentecostal theological high school, a vocational high school, but is founded or ran by the government, which makes it a public high school. So it's not private, it's part of the public system of schooling here in Romania. Then I could not talk about my thesis without mentioning a few words about the wonderful ODC experience I had in the summer of 2019. It's a group of wonderful researchers, and of course you can see Anne-Marie and Peter and the rest of the team, Katarina and others in that picture. Unfortunately, the picture is gone from my screen. I only see a white screen. I apologize for having to interrupt again. Let's see. Okay, so here is the wonderful ODC summer 2010 group, which I have very fond memories of. It's there that I've met the colleagues and also Professor Joshua Searle and others. So I'm very grateful for this experience, and it has meant a lot for my development as a PhD student. Okay, now about my research. So I will now talk about the thesis which I'm working on, and thank you for allowing me to. There is a good definition I found on the internet about research. It's spending 6 hours reading 25 papers so you can write one sentence containing 2 references. If anyone can identify with that definition of research, I can. So there has been a lot of work involved in the background of what I'm going to present, but hopefully it's going to make sense to those watching and listening. So my thesis is entitled Communio Sanctorum toward the Pentecostal Theology of Public Life. And we are going to look at my research questions, the questions I have based my research on, my research methodology and aims, and then, of course, my thesis outline. I will not go into a lot of details. I will not talk about specific findings, since the thesis is not done yet and submitted. So I will guard the truths I have discovered, so others cannot steal them. I'm just joking. I will just have a general presentation without going into a lot of detail. So the first thing, research questions. To fellow doctoral students and researchers, I would like to say that research questions are one of the most important things in a doctoral process, because if the research questions are articulated right or formulated right, this is going to give laser sharp direction and focus to the work, to the research, to the thesis. So before I started, and here's something that ODC has contributed to a lot in my layout work, I have formulated these research questions. So they are: what is a Pentecostal theology of public life? How can we outline a Pentecostal theological view of public life, starting from a phenomenology of global Pentecostalism? What exactly could be the organizing element or the foundation of a Pentecostal theology of public life? And here are a few candidates: the paradigm of various languages or other foreign languages, the full gospel, pneumatological imagination, holiness, sanctification, etc. What models or theological matrices have been identified or proposed in the literature so far, and what are their strengths and weaknesses? And of course, why a theology of public life? Why does the world need a theology of public life, and a Pentecostal one in that? There are some more research questions. How is God at work by his Spirit in public life, or the life of society? How should the church do God's work in the public square? What does it mean for the church to dwell in the interval between the ascension of Christ and his return? What is, from a Pentecostal perspective, the relationship between church and world? In other words, in what way can the church be at the same time an insider, but also an outsider in its relationship with the world? Of course, the answers to these questions engage a proposed reflection on several theological fields: fundamental theology, anthropology, ecclesiology, soteriology, eschatology, missiology, etc. Plus other fields such as sociology, economics, political science, ecology. These are three fundamental terms, or there are three fundamental terms which are full or impregnated with social political meaning and tension, which find their etymological origin in the Greek word oikos, translated home or household: ecology, economics, and ecumenism, to cite Daniela Augustin. Finally, what does it mean for Pentecostals to be a prophetic community and, at the same time, a community that sustains the fiber of a nation through its vast and multiple overlapping public dimensions. In other words, how can Pentecostal Christians keep the balance between their contribution to the welfare or the peace of the city and the defense of truth and justice on behalf of those at the margins? These have been the basic, the foundational research questions that have driven my work. A short word of definition. What is a Pentecostal theology? From my point of view, or actually this is the definition I give in my thesis, a Pentecostal theology of public life is a critical theological reflection on the realities of public life from the perspective of Pentecostal identity and spirituality. The aim of my research and of the thesis itself is a threefold one. The threefold aim of a Pentecostal theology of public life should be to interpret, evaluate, and facilitate the transformation of public life in the light of the biblical revelation, the complex realities of today's public life, and the rich Pentecostal spirituality. And now I will present some things about the methodology I used. There are 3 steps. This is to conceptualize a bit. I will later show you my working outline. There are 3 methodological steps. The first one is defining and identifying the structural model of public life. One of the things that I have discovered as I researched and studied is that although there's a lot of talk about public life, there are a lot of publications, even technical or scientific ones, that talk about public life. Public life as such is rarely defined. What exactly is the textbook definition of public life? Most people identify it or even overlap it with political life. So the political life of the city or the country is public life. Public life is more than that. In an oversimplified version or definition of public life can be said to be life in public. So any kind of life which is lived coram mundi, in front of the world, is public by definition. Well, that is an oversimplification. So what exactly is public life? And drawing from sociology and sociology of religion, from political philosophy and theology and public theology, I have formulated a pattern or a model of public life, which I will share with you right away. So the first step is defining and identifying the structural model of public life. The second step is identifying those elements specific to Pentecostal theology and spirituality that generate the main tendencies, attitudes, and postures of Pentecostal behavior. Sorry, that's a misspelling there, in relation to public life. So there have to be, and there are, certain characteristics or certain understandings which are deepened very well and deep-rooted in the Pentecostal theology and spirituality, which create or generate a certain posture towards whatever is public, including life. And the third step, which is finally let's say the ending or the coronation of the entire work, is a bi-transformative, and by I understand mutually transformative, theological reflection, which aims to point out the elementary principles of a theological grammar of public life from a Pentecostal perspective, articulated in the spirit of the common good and the flourishing of all creation. Talking about the methodology, there are also 3 parameters I have kept as reference points, or as points that circumcise somehow my work. The Holy Scripture, which gives me the biblical parameter. And by Holy Scripture, I mean the coherence and hermeneutical continuity of the biblical meta-narrative. Any theology of public life, any Pentecostal theology of public life for that, should be deeply grounded or rooted in the Holy Scriptures as God's revelation. And there should, or it should be able to preserve that continuity, that hermeneutical continuity of the biblical meta-narrative. Then a second parameter is the community of faith. A theology of public life, like any other kind of theology, can be an accurate one, according to my opinion, only if it is done within the community, and if it's done in relation to the community of faith. And here is the theological parameter. In a more technical way, the theological parameter is the Christologically centered pneumatological vision of Pentecostal theology and spirituality. It might come as a surprise to many, but the fivefold or the full gospel that Pentecostals preach is not centered on pneumatological issues. It's not centered on the person of the Holy Spirit, as some may presume, because Pentecostals talk a lot about the baptism in the Spirit and speaking in other tongues and pneumatological charismatic manifestations. Pentecostal spirituality and theology is somehow centered pneumatologically. Well, the truth is, it is Christologically centered, because the fivefold gospel is Christ as the Redeemer or the Savior, Christ as the Sanctifier, Christ as Baptizer with the Holy Spirit, Christ as Healer, and Christ as Coming King. So it is not pneumatologically centered, it is Christologically centered. We might say Trinitarian centered, but it does have indeed a pneumatologically envisioned or imagined look at the outside world. And so this is something I kept as a parameter. And the third methodological parameter is society and public life, which is the public parameter. That one is matching with the proposed structural model of public life. Now, the model or the structure of public life I work with is here in brief. Public life is life lived with a public identity. So whether we talk about an individual or about a community, a group, there is such a thing as public identity. Who am I in the public and for the public, for the outside world, and especially in the public space, as we will see. So as any other Christian group or denomination, Pentecostals do have a public identity, which is mobile in a sense, but which is built on what I would call the Pentecostal ethos, or the Pentecostal ethos of spirituality. So public identity, life lived with a public identity in the public space or public square, then is marked by public speech. So the public discourse or the public speech is an important aspect of public life, which amounts or leads to a public culture. And here I speak less of a cultural imagination and more of social imaginary. So the imaginary that is built socially at the grassroots of a nation that impacts somehow the way people see things, relate to things around them. So that is public culture, and which finally amounts to a certain type of public behavior. Public behavior, call it social ethics or anything else. It's the way a Christian, in this case a Pentecostal or a Pentecostal community or Pentecostals in general, behave in the public square and in relationship to the domains of public life. Now I will share with you briefly some working hypotheses, some of the things that I have tried to work with and prove in my thesis. And the first one is this: a specific Pentecostal perspective on public life can be articulated on the basis of the notion of social holiness, understood in Pentecostalism as a way of existence in the world, a sort of Heideggerian Dasein. This notion is best captured in the ecumenically shared creedal phrase Communio Sanctorum. Communio Sanctorum means a lot of things for different confessions or people, but Communio Sanctorum as the fellowship of saints or the communion of saints is something that all Christians share regardless of the nuances of the interpretation. And there are at least 3 interconnected criteria which both circumscribe and verify this hypothesis. The biblical one, concerning the continuity and hermeneutical coherence of the biblical meta-narrative. The theological one, which aims at the ethos of Pentecostal spirituality, respecting the theological sensibilities born of the pneumatological imagination of the fivefold gospel. And the public one, which is the proposed structural model of public life. A second hypothesis I use is that for Pentecostalism, holiness, social holiness at that, is a dynamic, pneumatologically imagined, ontological, relational and ethical way of being in the world, as a community of faith, hope, and love. The notion of Communio Sanctorum manages to reconcile these 2 important meanings: the community sanctified by the Spirit and the pneumatological sanctification experience in the community. For the Pentecostal or the Pentecostal doctrine of sanctification, understood in the light of social holiness, that is Communio Sanctorum, as I'm proving in the thesis, is of vital importance in formulating a specific Pentecostal theology regarding public life. And its specificity does not reside in any of the 5 axioms taken separately or singularly, but in the special constellation that arises when they are put together. The fervent, fivefold Pentecostal gospel is therefore greater than the sum of its parts. Together, they consecrate Pentecostalism as a distinct public expression of the Christian faith. Another hypothesis I work with is that due to the mobile identity of Pentecostalism, and here I draw from Andrew Drugers and others who have written extensively on the sociology of Pentecostalism, mobile identity means its ability to be indigenized in local languages, customs, and experiences. A Pentecostal theology of public life will be fueled by the pluralism of the Pentecostal social political body, and not only the Pentecostal political body, but the Christian ecumenical body in general. For Pentecostal theology, holiness is a pneumatologically and prophetically imagined way of life in the world, a generator of concepts, positions, and practices that feed, regulate, and condition the public life of the church. The hermeneutical lens to which this mode of existence can be decomposed is given by the biblical triad of faith, hope, and love. And now I will very briefly scroll on the screen my working thesis outline. Just a second, let me get out of this document. Okay. Please keep in mind that this is a working one and it's not the final one, which you will see in the document, the final text. So I have a first chapter called Prolegomena, introduction, in which I try to answer 3 questions. what do we propose? And I am very specific about a theology of public life, not a public theology of life. Some might find that difference or that distinction bothering, especially those specialized in public theology. It's not a rebuke of public theology, but it is a clarification or a qualification of my work. My thesis is registered in Pentecostal theology and spirituality. So officially speaking, it's not in public theology, but in Pentecostal theology with a public relevance. Where do we begin? Where does Pentecostal theology of public life begin? What does it begin with? And there are several candidates I mentioned. And what are the research questions? Then, of course, status questionis, review of literature, which all builds up to identifying the shortcomings. There isn't much written, especially on this kind of focus, and what is written is quite superficial, I would say, using, unfortunately, quite a harsh word. So this gives me the niche, this gives me the road to my specific research, and I single them out here. Then, of course, defining the task and the presentation of the working hypothesis. Let me see, why isn't this? Okay. Then the second chapter is entitled The Contours of Public Life. And of course, I start by the question, what is public life? I'm trying to define it both from a philosophy of or political philosophy standpoint and sociology standpoint. So there are some general contours, some definitions and issues and basic areas of public life, some social political contours, and then some biblical and theological contours. And then I present, or I propose, I should say, my model, my structural model of public life, public identity, public space, public discourse, public culture, and public behavior. Then the third chapter is entitled Pentecostalism, an exploration of its identity. And here I talk, because Pentecostalism in Romania is not very well known, especially in university, academia level. I am also writing the thesis with this in mind, so I'm trying to give a lot of information of what is Pentecostalism, what are some ways to study Pentecostalism, and all this leads the way to defining the Pentecostal spirituality core, which I'm interested in, because this core, whether articulated or less articulated as usual, because Pentecostals don't have a lot of theology written, generates those postures towards public life. There's a lot of stuff to go through there. I'm just mentioning the general idea of the chapter. Then the fourth chapter is called Pentecostalism and Public Life. And here I deal with the main dimensions of public life, the social political dimension of Pentecostalism, the economic dimension of world Pentecostalism, the cultural dimension of world Pentecostalism, and I review the main features. Then the second part of the fourth chapter is a critical theological synthesis of the relationship between Pentecostalism and public life. And this is something I call a constructive prophetic descent. This is borrowing from Miroslav Volf, who talks about a mild difference or a gentle difference. I build this concept of constructive prophetic descent. And I talk about some situational grammars between Christianity and public life. I offer a critical evaluation of these proposals, and then I build my own. And the last chapter, on which I'm still working, so you won't see a numbered outline, is the final bringing together of all the puzzle pieces, Communio Sanctorum toward the Pentecostal theology of public life. And here I discuss what is Communio Sanctorum, its history, confessional interpretations and definition of word, the potential of this notion as an organizing principle for a theology of public life. And I deal with it as a biblical argument, as a confessional argument, as an ecumenical argument meaning another justification. And then the elaboration of my proposal, which I'm still working on and will hopefully finish soon. So this is a short presentation of my outline, in some way similar to what I started with, and Peter and Katarina know this, and Josh also, and in some ways different, a lot different from what I started with. But to finish my talk, I will just say, just a second, I will just say that it has been an incredible journey. I have been very blessed by this journey and by the research I've done. And I hope that it will bring a small contribution, at least, to the understanding of Pentecostalism and to the understanding of Pentecostal theology of life. So thank you for giving me the honor to present at the webinar and for your participation. I hope I respected the time.
You did quite well, and it is really a very, very important topic that you have been dealing with. And I know that some of the doctoral students in the Osijek Doctoral Colloquium group is dealing with this issue of especially public life from different perspectives. I propose that we may, I don't know, maybe we should now return back to the setting where we see each other well. Yes, so I can see also if someone has questions to it. Maybe I start with a practical, when do you think will your dissertation be completed and presented then to the board?
Hopefully in January or February, I will have what we call the first presentation, meaning that it will be presented to my professors and to my coordinator. And then about 2 months later, it's a legal time to organize the final board. 2 months later, the public defense. So probably April, May, something like that, the public defense or the VIVA.
So we hope maybe that you would have time to come end of June, July to Osijek to celebrate it with some of us.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm involved in a project for which I have to be in the States in June, in the end of June, but the beginning of July I will be back, and if possible I would like to celebrate with all of you. And I know there is a good place in Osijek called not Peter Penner but Peter Pen, in which you can have the best ice cream. So it's on me when I come in July.
That sounds very good. Before we start asking our questions, maybe you have also something where you are struggling with and we could help, actually, maybe, because you are not yet there, and this is a community that wants to help you to succeed.
Thank you very much. the thing that will help me most right now is to hear some feedback from you.
Okay.
How do you perceive, how do you feel these concepts I'm working with? Of course, it is quite narrow because I'm writing from a Pentecostal standpoint, and ours is a diverse community, confessionally speaking. But still, there are some concepts, there's some, how do they sound, how do they work for you, where do you see weaknesses, strengths? This is going to help me a lot. Frankly speaking, it's a bit figured out of how it's supposed to end, but it's still in a place where I can adjust. I can adjust things, and this not only for the thesis, but for my own thinking and for my own becoming as a Pentecostal theologian. So just hearing your feedback would help me greatly. And the thing I'm struggling with the most is time. I'm praying for a miraculous 26-hour day. I don't think God is in the business of making 26-hour day, but I'm still praying for such a miracle. Because
you may remember
it's not only doctoral work. If it should be just this, it would be fine. But there's church, full-time pastor, full-time principal and educator, full-time dad and husband, and other projects. So
yes.
Time is the thing. This is why I haven't submitted it yet. And my professor Marcel is always telling me, hey man, are you still alive? When are you going to submit the thesis? I'm like, I'm working on it. But it's actually time to just sit down and type and write.
Yes. From the 2019 meeting, my saying this 24 hours a day and then the night. So in that way, we are all limited to this. I would like to continue just the conversation between the two. So I would like to open up the conversation, especially because it's also interesting what kind of backgrounds are around this Zoom group. Like two colleagues are coming from Central Asia, and I know Alexei looks from a very different reality of Kazakhstan, where he is as a lawyer defending evangelicals who are pressed into a corner, when in Romania the whole evangelical community is quite strong. And so public life is different. So how do you contextualize this for Romania? Or how contextualized is what you're writing for the Romanian context?
It is contextualized in two ways at least. First, yes, Romanian Pentecostals right now have ministers in the government, senators, deputies, mayors, chiefs of regional councils, all kinds of dignitaries. So we talk about public, and not only this, but from a cultural standpoint and educational standpoint, we have public schools, high schools, universities that are Pentecostal, state-founded, but Pentecostal, and which is something very strange for Europe and maybe for the rest of the world. So yes, public life is booming in Pentecostalism in Romania, or the vice versa. But at the same time, the trap for Romanians, as for, I would say, some American evangelicals, is to start to trust way too much in political possibilities and to develop a wrong theology of public life, meaning that we forget what the church is about, and what the church is called to do, what Christians are called to be, and start to transform into a political party or community with an ideological agenda that bans others from public life or that emphasizes certain values, and that's all. So I'm contextualizing for Romania, of course, it's as I said, it's a mutually or bi-transformative journey, meaning that I look as a Pentecostal at what's going on in public life, but then I also look from the standpoint of public life, and as a public school principal, I can do that, to what Pentecostalism is doing, and somehow trying to mutually inform these things so that Pentecostals will continue to get involved, but with the right kind of mindset and theology. And maybe I should say with an articulated, deep theology that is biblically grounded, confessionally specific, and also adapted to the realities of Romanian public life.
Thank you. Thank you. Questions, comments? I look at Joshua. I haven't seen you so long, for a long time. I'm sure with your Ukrainian experience time, there is some parallels, I think, with Ukraine and Romania. Strong evangelical communities there, difficulties, corruption also. How do you deal with ethics and all of those interesting issues? But Joshua, you want to comment?
Yeah, gladly. Thanks, Peter, and thanks to Ciprian for the excellent presentation. I commend you for the work that you're doing and raising these important issues. As Peter said, I'm interested in public theology and the issues of contextualization that Peter's already raised, and also specifically the history of the evangelical church in post-Soviet, the post-Soviet era, but also under Soviet communism. But what's interesting, I don't know how close the parallels are with what's happening in Romania, but Romania does at least share a border with Western Ukraine. And it was also, of course, behind the so-called Iron Curtain. So I can imagine there are some similarities. But the thing is, with Ukraine and with post-Soviet evangelicalism in general, the history of the church is a history of marginal existence. So marginalization, struggling even to survive, even to maintain their personal faith, was a serious challenge. And so any attempt to be concerned about the wider public sphere seemed like a luxury that people just couldn't afford. It was an indulgence. So I think that's one of the challenges, and I think this is why it's so encouraging to see the pioneering work that you're doing to encourage your Pentecostal brothers and sisters in Romania, and I hope that your influence has an even wider reach into neighboring countries, not least Ukraine. But my specific question, or I don't know if it's a question or a comment, how I would formulate it, is that in my experience, theology ever since the time of the Apostle Paul has been a response to a crisis. So Paul was responding to certain crises that emerged in the local churches. We can read about, we can formulate his theology from that, a theology of crisis. The theology of Nicaea and Chalcedon concerning the two natures of Christ. This was a response to a heresy that emerged in the ancient church. So theology tends to emerge in response to a crisis. And what I find is interesting about your work is that presumably your vision of public theology in Romania in the early 21st century is written in response to a crisis. And presumably the crisis has to do with the marginalization, the exclusion of the evangelical church from mainstream public life, and also from mainstream church life in that context. So my question to you is, to what extent is this a self-conscious part of your thinking as an observer participant, as a Pentecostal believer yourself, observing your own culture and the crises of post-modernity, of post-Christendom, of the post-Soviet, post-secular environment. There are multiple crises in the former Soviet Union, the post-Soviet space. To what extent is your vision of public theology a response to these contextual public crises?
Well, thank you, Josh. Your question is very right on the spot and very stimulating. You are right. The way I write my thesis and the way I plan to write theology is a response to crisis, but it's more than that. First of all, I would say it is a response not only to the former crisis of marginalization, it is also a response to the crisis created by the Pentecostal quest for respectability. Pentecostals worldwide, but especially in this post-Soviet space, have struggled a little bit too much, in my opinion, to be respectable, to be accepted as somebody or someone with a dignified position and to be given public dignities. And I don't know if that struggle is a good one or a worthy one all the way. But I see this tendency, which, as I said before, tends to very easily degenerate into political ideology, especially targeted or oriented towards nationalism, populism, and all kinds of isms that we don't really want to be dealing or having to do with as Christians. So the crisis is not that much the former one of marginality, but a newly found one or a newly created one by all of a sudden being given public functions and space and platforms, and now not having a very well thought and articulated theology of how to do this. And people do it by ear. Most of them, they have a feeling, they have it in their gut somehow, how we should do politics, how we should get involved as Pentecostals or as Christians. We should do this, we should uphold the traditional values. But because it's not a robust, well-articulated theology, it is oscillating, deviating, and in my opinion, dangerously aimed. It can be manipulated and confiscated by all kinds of political ideologies to play their own games. So the crisis I'm responding to is both the old one of marginality, but also the newly created or found one of respectability, and how we should do this. On a second thought, my wish, my desire is that I will be able to write in the future not only as a response to crisis, but also as a let's say a constructive exercise in which I could, maybe I'm using big words, but maybe let's say I can prophetically somehow see certain perils or certain traps or certain things in the future that await for Pentecostal public life, and be able to prevent by writing, by talking about them, and by warning about them. So.
Thank you. I think that's a very astute observation, and I think it's helpful to be aware of the crisis, not just in the wider culture, but also the crisis in the church. And you've mentioned the danger of this concept of public theology being conscripted by certain political ideologies in order to serve an alien agenda, as we're seeing, for instance, in without wanting to become too political at this point, the way in which Vladimir Putin in Russia often invokes so-called traditional Christian values in order to justify his imperial policies and military incursions into whether it's Georgia or Ukraine, other parts of the former Soviet Union. And often there are some naive Christians in the West who regard Putin as the great defender of Christian values and family values, etc. So I think I think the prophetic role of public theology is not simply to address crises in the contemporary culture, but also to warn the church against this kind of ideological conscription of.
Yes, it is true. It's the same thing, like I said. But you describe me as someone doing pioneering work, so that makes me a pioneer. I'm afraid pioneer might very well turn into martyr.
Yeah, at least in Romania, because a prophet is never without honor except among his own people. So we'll see. Yeah, but thank you. It's really fascinating.
Thank you very much for your feedback.
Other questions? Otherwise, I would jump in with questions, but I don't want to take others' opportunity. Right, as you are thinking, maybe my question, I assume it is more than a crisis. It is an opportunity that you have in Romania since the opening, with all of the dangers that you have there, and maybe also with different church mentalities that you have there. On the one hand, there's pragmatic, we have the open floor and we can do something and change. And as I hear you saying, we haven't really thought through, there is not a real theology and ethics base for how to behave. We see what the Orthodox do and how they are involved in the Romanian public space. We don't want to be like them, but how do we want to be? And on the other hand, I assume there is still quite a group, like in other places, formed still by the former post-communism, Soviet, whatever mentality. Some people speak about Homo Sovieticus in some ways, but thinking of churches who themselves marginalizing and trying to be in a corner and saying we are the holy rest. Do you have that in Romania, and how is your dissertation respond to this also?
Well, thank you very much, Peter, for your question. Romania, or let's say Pentecostalism in Romania right now, is situated in a very strange mixture of things and situations. We are in love, and I'm critical now, we are in love with what the new freedom has given us, the public platform. But at the same time, we remain confined to a thinking that is part of what I would call the evangelical former Soviet Union ghetto, very self-minded, survival mode kind of existence, that is, or that doesn't know how, not that it's not willing, but it doesn't know how to engage publicly for the good of all people, not only the Pentecostals or Baptists or evangelicals. So yes, there are communities, not many, but there are communities that are somehow self-preserving and self-centered. But at the same time, there is a fresh spirit or blowing of the spirit that opens the eyes to the new possibilities. And this is why I developed in my thesis a concept that I call constructive prophetic dissent or dissent. Yeah, because there is somehow a middle way between being dissidents or total dissidents and being assimilated or somehow assimilated with the main culture. There is, or there should be, a way of living in this interval in such a way that you are not totally staying, but not totally living, and somewhere in between. And this is what I call dissent. It's prophetic because it interprets both the past and the present in light of the revelation, and it's prophetic also because it envisions and warns of the future dangers or way of what's going to happen. And it's constructive because it doesn't seem to criticize and to tear down and to say that everybody's not good, only we are good. But it's constructive in the sense that it truly and sincerely aims at the good of all people and the flourishing of all creation. So this is in a nutshell my development of this concept of constructive prophetic dissent.
Thank you very much. And I see the profound responses, and I like that you come really from biblical theological perspective to this topic, not just looking at what is sociologically happening and responding to it, but on the other hand that you bring sociology and other areas into this, because this is part of our world we are in as the church, and as the context is changing, so the church needs to change and respond. So I think this is really an important way to go. There isn't too much time left, really, but I would like to still, if someone has a question, to open up for one more question. Anyone? We are a little over time, so we should close, but Abhay, please.
My question: can Pentecostals participate in parties, political parties? If can, how where should they go? To one party or to two parties or to four parties? And can they argue with each other from different points? So how do you think can Pentecostals participate in political parties?
Thank you very much, Abhay, for the question. Is a very, very good one and a very practical one, in the sense that it is, you can see this in political life, for example, in Romania. We have Pentecostals involved in different parties in Romania. The two major parties in Romania are the Social Democratic Party and the National Liberal Party. And there are very high level officials in both parties which are Pentecostal. And of course, it's like the Republicans and the Democrats in the States, they don't get along, but they are still brothers in Christ. Then there are some tendencies, I don't know someone particularly, but I know there is somehow an openness toward more populistic ideologies among evangelicals and even among Pentecostals. This kind of public discourses like our nation, our mother nation, and the traditional values of traditional family, and the rejection of this European LGBT ideology and all that, and coagulating somehow around a very nationalistic, xenophobic, populistic kind of ideology that, to my surprise, attracts a lot of evangelicals and Pentecostals. I don't know why. I have some self-explanation, but I don't know why. I haven't studied this officially. So yes, there are Pentecostals involved in different kind of political endeavors. Your question is if this can be, and as reality shows, it can be. It can be. And I'm not sure that it would not be good to be so. So it's not like, okay, if you're Pentecostal, this is like the old Philetist ideology, you know, if you are Orthodox, you are Romanian and you have to defend this kind of, no, Pentecostals can embrace different political visions as long as they have a theological or biblical good explanation for why they subscribe to a certain, say, political vision. But it's not as if all of us have to have the same political convictions. Yeah, there is plenty of room for diversity. However, how we do politics and how we envision holding and exercising political power, even to the level of governance, there we should be very careful, because very easily our Christian and Pentecostal identity can be affected very badly by political decisions which are not grounded in the Bible, although they might first appear to be. We might be tempted to believe that defending the traditional family against all attacks, domestic or foreign, is the biblical thing to do, if we forget that God allows all people and all sinners to live so that they can you know, understand the gospel and repent. So the liberty that citizens should have, let's say, this principle that we should opt for a pluralistic democratic society in which everyone has a word around the table and not exclude others, this should be values that Christian political people should defend. So there is and there can be a diversity of political visions among Pentecostals. How they should do politics should be very carefully guided by the Bible. And fortunately, my attempt at formulating a Pentecostal theology of public life will partly help such people orient, you know, themselves in this maze.
Thank you. I think here we could actually just continue this discussion in many different ways, on ethics, on how do you work on compromises in a party, how is the, you know, structure of, as a Christian, how much can you actually go under the rule of decisions of the party as an individual and Christian. But then public life is a lot more than that.
Yes.
It is business. It is many other things.
Economics, culture, justice, education, many.
Yes.
Media.
So I really hope that somewhere we would have maybe a conference or something where we could discuss this topic beyond it. So maybe you can push somewhere. I know you have been speaking at different conferences on probably similar or the same topic, but we probably need more in our Eastern European context to talk about this and to listen and to find ways how that operates. For now, I think I have to summarize or close up this conversation. Again, it is a wonderful topic, and I think a topic that we are just in the beginning to discover. It may take a whole generation of Pentecostals till we get really to the point in Romania, and I don't know whatever happens in the different other countries where we are representing. Thank you, Ciprian. We really hope that you will be successful, complete successfully. In fact, I look forward to see the dissertation. It will be in Romanian, right?
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me and for giving me this opportunity. Again, ODC has meant a lot for my formation. It will be in Romanian in the beginning, but we already have plans to translate at least part of it or the main of it in English. And like my supervisor uses to say, there's a lot of he uses the expression in Romanian, there's a lot of bread to eat here, meaning this is a huge bread that we can keep eating many years from now. And the more you dig, the more you eat, it seems larger and deeper. And the fun of it, or the beauty of it, is that you bump into this kind of realities of everyday life every day, you know. And so it's not something that is just abstract theology. It's something that you live with every day, and so it's quite relevant.
Yes, yes. How to implement all of this, and conversation will help us to go through this. So I think I may just return this back to Taylor. I don't know if there's anything else to give, to say as information to the group. This is our second meeting for this year, and next year we'll continue. Yes, Ciprian, please.
If I may, both those who have been present virtually and those who will watch it later online on YouTube or whatever, I would greatly appreciate feedback from you. You have my email address. Maybe you can put it somewhere, Taylor, on Facebook or so. It's public, so I don't mind it being there. And people watching, I would appreciate if they would give a feedback, critical feedback. I don't mind if some point out weaknesses or some blind spots, or also constructive critical feedback. So I would greatly appreciate this, and I promise to integrate all the feedback into the final product. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ciprian. Taylor,
Yes,
any comments?
Thanks again for everyone who participated in today's webinar. As Peter said, there won't be a December one. December is a big month for us all, but we will have the ODC winter coming up in January, and then the SAM's annual conference in February. I hope that you are able to attend. And don't forget also that SAM's, we have the ACTA journal. So if you're writing any paper that you think people in Central and Eastern Europe would find of interest, please consider submitting that paper to the ACTA journal. And I hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you, Taylor. So have a good afternoon. And again, Ciprian, thank you very, very much for really a very, very interesting topic. And I hope you will get more response, comments, and yeah, looking forward.
Thank you.
Also to see you in person soon.
I look forward to it. And
yes,
I embrace you all with love, with brotherly love.
Thank you very much. Goodbye then.
Goodbye. God